Hey there, welcome to the Uncensored Unprofessor, a podcast where I want to think more deeply with you about Christian faith and life. Hey, all you believers, you non-believers, you unaffiliated believers, you sort of believers, and you think I'm a believer's welcome. I'm Dr. Ed, the Uncensored Unprofessor. What a great day it is to turn our minds on for the quest of truth. Truth, you beautiful beauty, you. Truth, you set me free just like He said you would. Thank you, glorious God, for truth. Truth is important as we navigate life. For instance, a young man used to make a few dollars as a bagpiper. He played mostly for funerals, and one time he was asked by a funeral director to play at a gravesite service for a homeless man. He had no family or friends, so the service was supposed to be at a cemetery in the Kentucky back country. The young man, the bagpiper, was not familiar with the area and got lost. And being a typical man, he wouldn't stop for directions. Finally, he arrived an hour late and saw that the funeral guy had evidently gone and the hearse was nowhere in sight. He saw the digging tools and the crew eating lunch, and so he felt bad and apologized to the men for being late. He went to the side of the grave and looked down. Well, the vault lid was already in place, but not knowing what else to do, he started to play. The workers put down their lunches and began to gather around. He played his heart out for this man who had no family or friends. He played his bagpipe like he'd never played before, all to this homeless man's memory. As he played Amazing Grace, the workers began to weep. They wept, he wept, they all wept together. And when he finished, he packed up his bagpipes and started for his car. Although his head hung low, his heart was full, and just as he was opening the door to his car, he heard one of the workers say, "I've never seen nothing like that before, and I've been putting in septic tanks for 20 years. It's good to learn. It's good to learn some basics about life. It's good to have some discernment, right? Is that hole over there for a septic tank or for a casket? But for most of us, godly discernment does not come automatically. It takes time and practice, and a word so dreaded for me, patience, and it takes study and being quiet and learning and experience. Discernment and understanding are not automatically granted to us in life, whether by our parents, our teachers, our boss, or church, or even by God. So again, that goofy joke has something to tell us about the importance of discernment. Respecting this series topic, mature, reasonable, wise, skeptical, and doubting folks tell us that religion is just silly. You've heard people say that. I sure have. You probably felt the pressure of disbelief toward you as a believer. I sure have. And again, I want to clarify for you that this skeptical perspective is not a neutral position. Polanyi wrote, quote, "The skepticism about religious dogma and the dislike of religious bigotry has completely transformed man's outlook on the universe." Like it or not, that skepticism toward religion has indeed transformed our Western understanding, and whether or not the whole human race has been shaped that way could probably be deeply debated. But this is episode 4 in my faith versus reason analysis, and I'm exploring some of the philosophic genius of Michael Polanyi. And from my study of him, he was not openly a believer, but he set up an epistemology that makes ripe a theistic unpacking. So again, let's look more deeply at Mr. Polanyi's understanding of human understanding. These are the things that we reviewed in our last episode. First, following Polanyi, we learned that scientists can never be perfectly objective. Even though the faith versus reason false dualism pretends and tells us that science is always and only objective. In one sense, we may derive from Polanyi that there is no pure objectivity. Again, that wasn't his final conclusion, but he points out along the way that kind of insight in order to show us that it's a myth that science is purely objective. So, number one, scientists can never be perfectly objective. Number two, scientists can't do their science without personal bias. Put more carefully, the scientist is always involved in her science. She cares. She wants to understand. She brings knowledge and beliefs to the work table that are already at hand, already accepted by her, even before she begins her work. So, of course, personal bias is involved in the doing of science. 3, Polanyi shows us that scientists believe that their knowing is important. They don't view themselves as insignificant space dust. They don't view what they are doing as ridiculous in light of 15 billion years worth of time. They're all biased to believe that what they're doing is significant. So they believe their knowing is important. 4th, we saw earlier from Polanyi that we cannot know unless we are the ones knowing. Now, that sounds like a bit of philosophic gobbledygook, but it's kind of so simple that it's kind of so obvious. One can never know something apart from oneself. And this is important because we are told that scientists are detached and objective and totally dispassionate as they work their discipline, but the truth is the scientist really cares. The scientist is involved in her or his knowing, and Polanyi preferred to sum all that up by saying all knowing is personal. So the scientist is involved. There's a great deal of subjectivity involved in the doing of science. It couldn't be any other way. We're finite beings. We're limited by space and time. New for today's episode, number 5, we can derive from Polanyi across his writings, all knowledge involves a risk. Not just religious knowledge, but scientific knowledge too. If someone's sincerely trying to understand the universe and the millions of components of the universe, if someone's trying to understand all of that in a sufficient or coherent manner, one is going to have to take some risks in one's knowing. People who believe that God started it all take the risk that they're wrong. People who believe that nothing actually caused all this, and that this is all ultimately about nothing, there's no meaning, they take an enormous risk that they are wrong. They also naturally have lives more full of despair and anguish than those who embrace knowledge that is meaningful. And if you don't believe me, sociological studies statistically bear that out. The point here is that there's no knowing, there's no knowledge that is void of risk. And the more important the knowing, the more important the idea, the greater the risk. So everyone's knowledge involves a risk, and greatly that has to do with the fact that we're all finite. A 6th thing that I want to point out to you, and I hope this isn't being too pedantic and too linear, but 6th, it's important for us to recognize in this science versus faith, science versus reason, reason versus faith debate that scientists are committed to their knowledge. They're committed to their knowledge. And this means that they're not being perfectly objective. For instance, scientists don't say, today I believe in the law of Q and how it will affect planet Z, but because I'm so objective and non-committal about laws and rules and constancies, tomorrow I'm going to believe in the law of R and how it will affect planet Z. No, scientists must be committed to how the discipline works, or else they won't be able to tell us the rest of anything meaningful. So, here's an example for you. In order to study the trajectory of a planet's orbit, the scientist at, I'm going to call it, Closed Universe Astronomy Research Center in Fallon, Nevada, just to give it a fictitious name and location of a place I've driven through many times. My daughter Carice just drove through there today. As we come and go from southern Idaho, I've been in Fallon, been through Fallon. The scientists at Closed Universe Astronomy Research Center in Fallon, Nevada, has to believe in a whole number of things to do the work. They have to believe in the existence of gravity, how inertia works upon bodies, the effect of space's vacuum on how the planetary body will or will not move. She or he has to believe those and many more things in order to predict accurately how that planet is going to move about. And if he doesn't believe those things, if she doesn't believe those things, she really can say nothing of meaning about the planet's orbit. But if she believes those things in order to do her astronomy, she believes them passionately. She believes them with commitment. She's committed to her knowledge. She has to be committed to her knowledge and the school of astronomical thought, the discipline of her own science's understanding, in order to even begin conducting research on a given planetary body. Her theories, her conclusions will make zero sense unless she believes in the givens, the assumptions of her understanding. Now, if an outsider or some brilliant scientist who didn't work at Closed Universe Astronomy Research Center in Fallon, Nevada, if someone came along and proposed new ways of measuring a planetary movement, or if they were to argue that there were other factors that Fallon's research center was neglecting in their research, everyone in that research center would be disturbed, if not upset. They wouldn't like to think they were omitting something, and they really wouldn't like that their established way of conducting science was being challenged. In fact, the history of science is full of many and nasty arguments, heated arguments, arguments that involve name-calling, tribalism, jeering, libeling, manipulating, power moves, slandering, all of that against other scientists, precisely because there is so much at stake, so much at risk in the doing of science, and the working of probabilities, and the production of technology and medicine, and the possibility of fame and money and prestige and professorial appointments. We could make a long list. There's so much at stake in the doing of science. And, of course, it can't be any other way. We simply can't critique one system of knowledge without relying on another system of knowledge. We simply can't critique one system of knowledge without relying on another system of knowledge. Even with, if we were to pause and say, we agree with contemporary deconstructionist philosophers, even if we said yes with them that it's all about nothing, we would still be assuming that nothing is the truth. Or even with contemporary neo-Marxists, we argue from the position that everything is about power, we would ourselves be taking a position involving a power grab. Polanyi, in his philosophic unpacking, said it this way, quote, "We can voice our ultimate convictions only from within our ultimate convictions," end quote, but I'm going to say it again because it's important for understanding the faith versus reason dualism. We can voice our ultimate convictions only from within our ultimate convictions. There's nowhere outside of space and time from which to voice those convictions. One might say there are no ultimate convictions that are true in life. Someone could say that. But then they would have just undone their own position because their position is that nothing is true. And if it's going to be true to the one who said it, then what they're saying can't be true. Otherwise, they wouldn't be believing what they're saying, right? And of course, everyone believes what they're saying. and that would make that assertion simply absurd. And I know that gets silly as you listen through it, but if someone said there's nothing true, they just undid themselves. Does it seem like I've been going at this for several episodes now? I have. Does it seem like I'm trying to help you see that all knowing involves risk, and so therefore it involves trust and commitment? I have. So what's my takeaway for all of this for you? We all are committed to our knowledge and beliefs. We all are committed to our knowledge and beliefs. And we are committed with passion. And this is just as true for the world of science as it is for the world of religion. Faith and risk and personal involvement and subjectivity, that is, limited perspective and bias and commitment, are just as work for the atheist scientist as they are for the theistic Muslim. Faith, risk, personal involvement, subjectivity, bias, and commitment are at work both for the person who believes that aliens millions of years ago put us on the planet, and for the theistic believer who says God spoke us into existence. Oh my goodness. Isn't it amazing then, awesome in the truest sense of the word, that what the Lord Jesus Christ wants most of all from you is your faith? He doesn't want your firstborn child. He doesn't want your happiness. He doesn't firstly want your good deeds. He wants you. He wants me. He wants us to know Him, to trust Him, to take the risk of trusting Him, to involve ourselves at the subjective level of everyday life. He wants our bias to be for Him and His way. He wants our commitment. In Mark 8, Jesus had healed a blind man's eyes, and around him and about him sprung up all kinds of interpretations. He's a charlatan. He's an impostor. He's a magician. He's a political deliverer. He's a simple Galilean. He's an ignoramus. He's inspired of the devil. He's a medical doctor. No, he's one of the prophets. All kinds of interpretations and explanations were swirling around him, just like they are today. But Jesus turned and said to his own disciples, "Who do you say that I am?" What did he want from his disciples? Their good works? Their public acts of charity? No. He wanted to know what they believed about him. It's for me the question that will confront the entire human race. It's the question without which there is no other. When I read through Leslie Newbegin's several books, I stumbled onto Michael Polanyi and Polanyi's philosophy, and I'm just going to tell you, I was rather amazed that in all of my years, and that's 11 to be exact, 11 years of post-bachelor's degree study, in all my years of study, I hadn't been required to read his epistemology. I don't know if I wasn't required to do that because he was a chemist philosopher, so that he's not known first as a philosopher. I don't know if it's that he denies the doctrine of evolution as an explanatory grid for explaining human existence. I don't know. But as an aside, I'll tell you it's interesting to me that Polanyi denied evolution as a legitimate explanation on the grounds that it was insufficient for the problem. Polanyi's position was that randomness, by definition, cannot produce meaningful order. Here's a long quote. I'm so sorry to read you quotes, but sometimes you just got to get the words just right. Here's Polanyi. We must conclude that the assumption of an accidental formation of the living species is a logical muddle. It appears to be a piece of equivocation, unconsciously prompted by the urge to avoid facing the problem set to us by the fact that the universe has given birth to these curious beings, including people like ourselves. To say that this result was achieved by natural selection is entirely beside the point. Natural selection tells us only why the unfit failed to survive and not why any living beings, either fit or unfit, ever came into existence. As a solution for our problem of life's origins, it's logically on par with the method of catching a lion by catching two and letting one escape. End quote. So, in Polanyi's scientific training and study, randomness can produce accidental order. Right? You've looked up into the clouds and you've seen a face. I look up into the clouds and I can see an animal. My father-in-law, Dennis McNutt, was here this week, and he looked up in the clouds and saw the mouth of a monster, right? We can find accidental order in randomness, but Polanyi believed that accidental order will be neither very complex or very abiding. And I think that makes sense. Complex order that conveys meaning and which abides, requires something greater than randomness. So it was fascinating for me in that section of Polanyi's book to not read him posit the supposition of a greater being, since we know that order and complexity and signification and language all come from beings, not from accidents. He didn't say any of that. I thought he was going to. He just left it at the critique of accidental order that comes out of randomness is not sufficient to explain the origins of life. So Polanyi did not at all deny that life, across billions of years, has changed and evolved. But he denied that the neo-Darwinian position suffices to explain how all of that occurred. Or put differently, Polanyi seriously engaged as a chemist, scientist. He engaged seriously with evolution, and he did that for many, many, many pages. But he finally didn't accept the theory of Darwinian natural selection as sufficient for explaining how beings came to be. I need to do, it's on my list of things to do to think through evolution with you. I'm way more muddled than I used to be about it. I used to be dead set against about it, and I've read so many books I'm muddled on it. But I just thought it was interesting that Polanyi doesn't accept it. And I'm just thinking with you, and this is only a guess, but I'm supposing that non-religious and skeptical university professors today are leery with Polanyi because he denied evolution. So, probably, according to their thinking, he must either himself have been an intellectual Cro-Magnon, or he was simply naive, or we should be suspicious of him, and those are all possible explanations of why the non-religious academies seem to avoid Polanyi's epistemology. But I find him powerful, and I hope for you find what he's saying powerful. And sometimes you guys in the sweep of philosophy, philosophers help us because of the novelty or the newness of their insights. Sometimes they show us elements of truth we hadn't considered before, but other times, and this one's also a legitimate philosophic endeavor, other times philosophers help us simply by clarifying truths that are true, but that we hadn't thought before. Sometimes they show us things that are sitting right in front of us, but we hadn't noticed. And with his piercing gaze, Polanyi helps me realize that all the truths about scientific knowing, scientific epistemology, are also true about religious truth, or, if you prefer, truths about ultimate questions. It's true. People just cannot take a position in good faith without being committed to their position. Yes, someone can be an agnostic, but they had better be a uncertain agnostic, right? If they're a passionate agnostic, then they really believe that we cannot know. If they're a dogmatic agnostic, then we do well to ask all manner of questions about how they can be so convinced of their doubt. So agnostics better be waffling and wavering. If in a conversation you hear a friend say, "But there's no way we can know," or if in a conversation your friend says, "But there's no way anyone can know," we need to recognize that either there's an emotional blockade occurring or they're simply being dishonest. Someone can't both say no one can know and then claim that they themselves don't know. They can't do that. So maybe another way of summing up Polanyi here is to say, no one's truly objective. Everyone takes the position they do, whether about human origins or the meaning of life or the significance of society or how to find deep purpose in life or about ultimate human destinies. Everyone takes the position they do based on commitments and beliefs that are very difficult to express or confess, right? Who out there can hold up that ancient DVD, the one that makes visible to our eyes human origins, and then say to us, "Here, I have the visual proof of how it all really took place"? Who can do that? No one. No one has that kind of proof. Or who can tell us with 100% certainty, "Here, listen, this is the meaning of life. Do this every day or once a month, and you'll be perpetually joyous"? Who can say that? No one. No one who's being honest makes those kinds of assertions. Yes, people really can say gravity is utterly and objectively true. Me, Ed? I wouldn't argue with such an assertion, but I don't know anyone who lives their life based on the truth of gravity. Yep, folks can say theoretical mathematics is the purest form of science available to human beings. But me, Ed, I don't know anyone who lives their life based on the truth of theoretical mathematics. So, I've worked diligently and carefully with you for a few podcasts now to bring us to this important point. Everyone lives by faith. Polanyi went to great pain and effort. There's like 400 pages of single-spaced 9-point font. He went to great pain and effort to help scientists and philosophers recognize that very truth. Everyone's knowledge is informed by faith, and it can't be any other way. Now, my point for all of this rumination is not at all to wreck philosophy or science or math, but I want to point out that the playing field for significant ideas is far more level than the traditional Western reason versus faith dichotomy would have us believe it. We Christians, we need not be frightened into expressing our faith assertions, not at least on the grounds that other folks who claim to not be religious, are only being reasonable. Let me tell a story to help make the point. Several years ago, I had a long, careful discussion with an extended family member. The point of our conversation involved a political matter. It was a matter that was rather volatile across society, and we were arguing back and forth, each making assertions to prove our point, and each mostly talking right past the other in the process. Right? I'm sure you've listened to or participated in conversations like that, and they often end up with no real sharing or learning taking place. It's kind of like two ships passing one another in the night. We sort of knew the other was there, but we couldn't see much of anything eye to eye, and when I realized we were at an impasse, I stopped and said, "Hey, why don't we try a different tack? Instead of throwing gotcha arguments in each other's direction, why don't we both explain why we are taking the position we are? Maybe for you it's an understanding of human rights, or maybe for me it's about a just use of power, or Maybe for you, your position is based on a utilitarian understanding of the care of others, while maybe for me, my position is based on a theistic understanding of the universe. Now, I'd like to tell you that we proceeded to share more deeply our hearts and our reasonings, but the truth is that my question about origins and foundations, my question about suppositions, stopped our conversation cold. Even though she had a college degree, she had never stopped and asked herself what were the premises, the beliefs, the commitments, or the foundations of her position. The truth was, I think, that her position was based mostly on her feelings about what was the true and proper answer to the political situation. But when I called her out on that, she wouldn't engage me any longer in the conversation. Most people on the planet never stop and ask themselves the very difficult questions about their understandings of reality. Sheeple. Most people on the planet just go along with the given. Sheeple. Again, just one reason why I love philosophic geniuses is that they almost always are willing to stop and ask hard questions, questions about foundations, questions about meaning and purpose. I love that Jesus asked hard questions. My son John, knowing how troubled I am by the Sheeple complex, sent me a joke the other day. It's a poorly drawn lines cartoon. The name of the cartoon's poorly drawn lines. And in the first panel, Ernesto, the green bear, was speaking to Kevin, the bluebird, and he said, "I have a theory, Kevin." In the cartoon's second panel, Ernesto was continuing, "We're all dumb. We don't know anything, and we want to be told what to believe." In the third panel, Kevin the bluebird says to Ernesto, the green bear, "I have no idea what you're talking about, but I'm 100% on board so far." And for me, sadly, that is so common and so true. Most people really are sheeple. 2,000 years ago, Jesus called us sheep. I think he was on to something. I think he knew in part that it's human nature to put our nose into the butt of the sheeple right in front of us and never question why we believe what we do. Now, like me, you've seen a flock of sheep. One sheep will go in one direction, and for reasons that I can't discern, suddenly the entire flock will begin following that sheep. Does any one of the sheep ever stop and say to himself, "Is the grass really greener over there?" Does that sheep ever wonder, "Wow, I was just enjoying this patch of field, so why are we all moving?" Or are sheep just like human beings? Do they just assume the thought process of the rest of the doubting sheep around them? Do they ever, and I mean ever, ask a difficult question about why they are cynics? Or maybe ask themselves a question that could have disturbed them for weeks on end, precisely because they want to know better, want to understand more carefully, want to probe deeper? Don't be a sheeple. Don't be a sheeple. That doesn't mean you have to be a cynic, but it might mean you actually ask an independent question now and then. Right now, I dare you to take a vow with me. Put your hand on your heart. Say out loud, from now on, I won't wander around, with my nose in people's butts, From now on, I refuse to be a sheeple, I'm willing, to ask hard questions, and wrestle with difficult problems, Thank you for taking that vow with me. Here's a personal story that's on topic for me. When I was in seminary, I took several biblical studies classes where we were openly taught that we should approach every biblical text and every theological position with a hermeneutic of suspicion. Some profs would say, question everything. Question even the greatest positions of the entire church. Now, I sure didn't realize then that some of my own professors were beholden to the mood of skepticism about human knowledge. I didn't realize that I was then being painted into a corner of doubt and uncertainty, and probably those profs truly meant well, but they didn't realize they were undoing their very premises. If as a matter of methodological principle I should doubt everything, then I sure as heck should also doubt them and their foundation of doubt. But they never would have wanted me to doubt their own wisdom. It wasn't until I had finished my own PhD that I began reading more widely and, I think, more wisely in ways that moved me toward a hermeneutic of belief. Rather than start with doubt, brilliant minds began to challenge me. Perhaps start with belief, not a faith in faith belief, not a faith in happy belief, not a faith in the confidence of my own feelings kind of belief. In short, not a cotton candy faith. And even as these brilliant minds posed the question to me about presuppositions, I'm going to tell you, my heart began to stir. That feeling, there was an intuition that faith is prior to knowledge, was then for me only nascent. It was nascent, but it was evident. And it wasn't until I began reading Newbegin and Polanyi and still others like Blush and McGrath and Ware and Losky and Zizoulas that I began to realize there were profound intellectual reasons for having faith before doubt, or profound intellectual reasons before placing doubt before faith. No, in all of life, faith comes first. We teach ourselves to doubt. And you, my dear listener, you have been swimming in a pool of doubt your whole life, and you didn't even know that this was being done to you. You didn't even know that the water passing in and out and through your gills for all of your life has been Western doubt handed to you by an intellectual legacy. Well, if you've listened to these several podcasts with me on faith and reason, then I hope you've seen the beauty of Polanyi's deconstruction of doubt. Doubt as a starting place, doubt as a foundational place for life is ruinous. Doubt will doubt itself. Doubt will corrode and corrupt and wreck itself. It has to. It must. It can do no other. In my next episode, I'm going to begin constructing a better foundation for you than the Cartesian platform. And in that episode, I'm going to show you how the Bible approaches reality, and it's actually quite fascinating. It's really quite audacious. And I truly hope you'll check out that episode. But for now, thank you so much for listening. You know I've said before, if you have questions or suggestions, please email me, uncensoredunprofessor@gmail.com, uncensoredunprofessor@gmail.com. And please go to iTunes, and you will find there the Uncensored Unprofessor. Go to iTunes and rate me, because that will help me to... That was rate. Go there and rate me. That will help me get the news out to make more present my presence on that electronic thingy we call the web. Turn your brains on, everybody.